everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Today is our 52nd podcast episode, which means, if you've been keeping track, that we've been doing this for a full year now, minus a couple of weeks that we took off, but this is our 52nd episode, a full year, I should say, of weekly podcasts. So,
which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you've listened to every single episode, thank you so much for sticking with us for the long haul. I know they're not all winners, but we're glad to be able to make this type of content for you.
And you guys are awesome for sticking with us and listening and popping out of the Discord to make fun of me. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we thought we'd do today is talk a little bit about all the things that have changed for us with respect to Airsoft over the course of the last year. I mean, COVID aside, of course, has created changes for almost everyone all around the world. And obviously for some people, it's been much more difficult than others. So we're not really going to get into the aspects of how COVID has impacted us. But suffice it to say, we know that many fields were closed and reopened and so on. But what we really want to focus on today is the other things that have changed, our perceptions that have changed, our approach to Airsoft, how that might have changed over the course of the last year, and sort of everything in between. I think a good place to start here is to talk about Bill C-21 in Canada. So if you've been listening to every single episode, you will have heard us talk about Bill C-21. This was a bill that was tabled by the Canadian government that would have severely restricted our ability to play Airsoft by making Airsoft guns prohibited devices in Canada. So you could own them, but you couldn't really buy them. You couldn't sell them, and it was dubious whether you'd actually be able to actually use them on other people.
Yeah, there's sort of are we allowed to take these out of the house anymore kind of question there as well. And it was very worrying in terms of, are we going to be able to continue playing Airsoft?
Totally. And there were no clear answers. The way that bills are debated in Canada, they're brought to the House of Commons, which they're debated and they're modified and they're debated again and they're modified and then they're sent to the Senate, which is our higher legislative body, where they're debated and modified. And so it's a bit of a lengthy process. And at the time, we didn't have very much to go on. We didn't know what would happen. And fortunately enough, the Canadian government declared an election, or called an election, that will occur at the end of September. And when that happens, the House is dissolved and any unfinished business just basically evaporates. So what this means for Airsoft in Canada now is that whatever government takes power as a result of the election, whether it's the Liberals, the Conservatives, or New Democrats, or whomever, they will have to reintroduce the bill, C-21 or what have you, and start the whole process anew, which of course they have seen some of the lobbying that took place as a result of the bill the first time. So if the bill is reintroduced, there might be a situation where we can work up front and we can sort of cash in a lot of this lobbying that we've been doing for Airsoft, so that Airsoft is not as impacted with future iterations of the bill, or it may just vanish and never come back. Either way, we want to make sure that Airsoft is sort of protected, and so we're continuing our lobbying efforts to make sure that our political candidates or representatives know that Airsoft is a harmless hobby that we engage in, and that we want to be able to continue to do for many years to come. And
I think there's a lot of reason for optimism in terms of expecting that if the bill is reintroduced, it will probably be reintroduced in some sort of modified form. Politicians seemed to be last going off receptive, I guess, to our sort of arguments that really, if you're doing a bill about prohibiting firearms, that Airsoft guns don't really qualify by any metric other than an aesthetic one, which is a pretty rocky reason to put them in there in the first place. So, at minimum, I think any further real action on the legislation on that is probably not going to do a whole lot before the end of next year sometime. So we've definitely got a long break in worrying about it, and possibly we don't have to worry about it ever again, which would be great.
Yeah, and ideally we get to a position where we're able to pass legislation on the other side, which guarantees Airsoft a status as what they actually are, which, as we've talked about, is just toy guns, right? If you're looking to, prohibit certain types of firearms, and without getting into the politics of firearm legislation, but if your whole point is to keep people from being killed by firearms, an airsoft gun has never killed anybody, right?
It's not really a thing they're capable of.
Yeah. When you look at the facts of the matter in Canada, really airsoft doesn't pose a threat to proper civil society. It doesn't pose a threat to any particular individuals. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to legislate whether or not people are able to own them. Without, again, diving too much into politics, that's one of the things that occurred this year in the middle of things, being bad with COVID. Like, on top of all of this, we have to deal with this other thing. So that wasn't super great. But as it stands right now, we know that we're going to have airsoft for several more months for sure, and perhaps for many, many years to come if nothing changed in that landscape. So that was one of the big things that occurred since we started with the podcast.
Definitely a stressor in the middle of our year of podcasting, right? Just, they're going to do what now?
Yeah, quite right. Now, onto the more fun side of things. What are some of the things that have changed for us in the last year? And if you've been playing the home game and listening to every single podcast, you will likely be aware that there have been certain pieces of kit that we've changed over the year. What my kit looks like today, what Pat's kit looks like today, is not what it looked like 12 months ago. So in my case, I made the move to using electronic amplified hearing. So I bought a set of Earmore headsets, active hearing protection, which is mounted directly to my Fast helmet, that connects directly into my comms, and provided me sort of a turnkey solution for amplified hearing, as well as having a more effective communication tool than what I had previously. So previously I had to just have like a bit of an earpiece, like one of those Secret Service earpieces with a PTT on my chest, and that was okay, but it wasn't like great, and it certainly wasn't very comfortable for many hours of play to have this earpiece in my ear. I even had a silicone molded one that was more comfortable, but it still wasn't awesome. So I decided to make the move to amplified hearing, and in doing so, created a whole lot of other problems for myself, in addition to a bunch of benefit. The first of which is that it is much harder for me to shoot offside, or it was harder for me to shoot offside. It required a bit of, let's say, practice to get it done. And
a little bit of rejiggering of what you were using in other aspects of your kit.
Absolutely. I couldn't put the PTT in the same place because it really got in the way, whereas my previous one didn't. And most importantly, I couldn't actually pick up my optic when I was on my offside. I needed to get a riser to bring my sight up to be able to actually see it in order to aim my rifle properly. So all of those things were new things for me to get accustomed to. And 12 months ago, these weren't problems that I was facing. These are brand new problems, or they were brand new problems as a consequence of me changing my airsoft kit around, right?
And there's sort of an interesting lesson there, I think, which is that every time we make something that seems like a simple change to our kit, inevitably it ends up meaning we have to tinker with more pieces than we're expecting. And I guess we should have learned our lesson by now, but I'm not sure that I can say I have, to be honest. I expect fully to buy a new PTT at some point in the next 6 months, because mine is sort of on its way out. Mm-hmm. But it's not, bad enough yet that I'm convincing myself to go spend the money. And I've half convinced myself I should buy a nicer one, but that's going to be physically a different shape than the one I've been using for the last couple of years. And I guarantee it's going to mess me up for several games.
Yeah, or it might not. You might get lucky and it doesn't. Right.
I mean,
but the bottom line,
I'll take it.
Exactly. If it doesn't, then great. But the reality is it certainly might. And if it does, you sort of need to be prepared for dealing with that. And I think my year of airsofting can be summed up by not being prepared to deal with the impact of the choices that I'm making to modify my kit. I think that's, a fair statement, because I put on the Earmore and I'm like, this is going to be great. And I'm like, I can't pick up my dot. This is garbage. And it's like, okay, I'm going to put a max hop up in my gun. This is going to be great. Oh, well, now I've got all this tech work that I need to do, and or Pat needs to help me with, and or Pat needs to do for me. And that's good. I'm not prepared for that. Oh, we're going to put a new hop up in the gun, or a new barrel in the gun, and that's going to affect my accuracy. I'm not prepared for the impact that that's going to have. And it's not to say that I didn't see it coming, but for a long time, I'd say probably a year and a half, 2 years prior to this, everything was just working fine. So I'm not accustomed to having to go through those motions again, right?
I feel like the optimal outcome here, as we sit waiting for the last sort of piece of the solution to the gun portion of the problem to arrive in the mail, is that, it's taken us a while to sort out how to get you working where you wanted you to be working, but you should pretty much be there in a couple of weeks, which is excellent. The frustration notwithstanding, there's a moral to take away from it, I think, of, this can be frustrating sometimes, but stick with it. You will, generally speaking, be able to get the problems with most pieces of gear sorted out. Sometimes you sort them out by hitting a thing with a hammer and getting a new thing, but for the most part, we haven't had to apply that particular drastic measure to your gear. You've also, I think, made upgrades to your kit alongside some of these frustrations. Like the digital hearing amplification stuff is cool, probably not the most important thing, but reliable comms going through a headset where you can actually hear what I'm saying is a humongous deal.
Totally. Absolutely agree. Yeah.
I actually switched to those a couple of years back, largely because one of our teammates stopped playing the sport due to some injuries and sold me them for a very reasonable price. And I'd just gotten my ears pierced and was like, I really don't want to get shot in a healing piercing. And I was sold the instant I put them on. Like first game, I was just like, oh wow, I can hear really clearly and my earpiece isn't falling out of my ear and I don't have to try to duct tape it to my earlobe to keep it in. And so I know that's a really positive change, and I know you've found the benefit to it also to be pretty significant.
Absolutely. And I mean, that piece of kit wasn't new to you, but I mean, since then as well, in the last year, I mean, we've talked about it a bit, but you've made a couple of significant changes, not least of which is your move. Well, the World War II stuff aside, we can sort of park that because it's more than a year in the making, let's say. But the HPA kit is something we've talked recently on the podcast because it's a very recent change for you. And as well as the 249, going back to a 249 and getting that working. And it's something that really we, a year ago, would never have considered. I don't think a year ago either of us would have considered an HPA or going back to a 249.
100%. I've definitely had a year that was heavy on adaptation with airsoft stuff. Honestly, the first thing this year that's a change for airsoft for me is me getting motivated to go out and play a lot more, which really, thank you. This podcast has been the driving force because I talk to you every week about how awesome airsoft is. And that keeps me from waking up Saturday morning at 8:00 and going, oh God, I'm so tired, I don't want to go. Instead, I'm rolling out of bed, making my coffee, being like, oh yeah, which is really good. I still haven't gotten to play, I guess, perhaps as much as I would like, relative to playing every week, but the downside to being an adult with a real boy job, right, is life, responsibility, that sort of thing. Going from there to talking about, the HPA setup, I have not had this much fun with an airsoft gun in a couple of years, to be completely honest. Partly the getting to build something new and tinker with something new and try all sorts of new stuff is wicked. Partly it's just working really, really well. I'm really happy with the performance of the rifle. I'm going to tinker with the RHOP when your stuff arrives. I have a new RHOP patch coming as well, because the RHOP in my gun was done 4 years and many thousand rounds ago. So I'm sort of I think it could probably be a little better. But I'm tremendously happy with the HPA setup. But it's also causing ongoing changes in my kit. Because where am I going to store the air bottle that goes with my HPA setup has been a real question, and not a question where I'm finding it irritating to answer, but definitely a question where I'm playing with my kit. So I, as we talked about a couple of podcast episodes ago, I grabbed a paintball solution that rigs to Molly from one of my friends and strapped it onto the back of my belt, and that sort of worked okay. But every time I played with it, I was sort of feeling like, oh man, am I going to bang this, $200 regulator on the top of my tank off something and crack it off? I don't really want that to happen, for obvious reasons. And I didn't really like it, so I put it on a battle belt that one of our teammates, Steph, had a spare one. He just tossed it at me to try, and then I bought it off him, and that works better because it doesn't bounce around as much, and it's a lot more comfortable by means of actually storing the tank, but it doesn't fix the, oh, am I going to smack this off something? So I recently was loaned a Maxpedition backpack to try, a really small, like 12-liter one, and for our recent training day, I tossed the tank and like 4,000 BBs and a couple other odds and ends and my multi-tool into it and just carted it around for the day, and it worked really, really well. I'm still feeling like I should have bought the 48-inch remote line instead of the 36-inch one, just for comfort of having extra slack to move around and stuff. But that's not terrible, and it's very easy to resolve. That's a $40 problem, and really, unfortunately, in airsoft terms, and especially in HPA and airsoft gun terms, a $40 problem is a cheap problem.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like you might not need a new hose at some point anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. And having a spare one's honestly okay, right? You know, like if I buy a 42-inch one, I'm just going to coil the 36-inch one up and keep it, and if the 42-inch one fails at some point, I can just be like, oh, I'll pull that out of the backpack, literally, and put it on the gun and go.
Yeah, definitely.
And I definitely am feeling at this point like, I mean, like definitely still the honeymoon period, right? I absolutely don't want to mislead people there. I've been running this for about a month, and it's really, really fun, and very, very different. But that doesn't mean, you know, it's for everyone, or that I'm, you know, necessarily giving you a fair and balanced view of it at the moment. Check back in a couple of months when it has done something weird and annoyed me and I've had to fix it, right?
I think as well, like when I'm thinking, hearing you talk about this, another piece that changed for me is my chest rig, right? That's another big change in the last year. So I did have that replica knockoff D3CR, and I decided that I wanted to keep using a chest rig as opposed to a JPC with my plates. And that's a decision really that I made this year, right? That I'm like, I'm not going back to JPC, right? I'm not going back to a plate carrier for airsoft.
Like, I find fun how sort of swift that change was, in the sense that you were like, I think I'm going to try this for a couple of games. Like, I got one on the cheap, and then almost immediately you sort of looked at the people who are running them and are like, I see why you switched to this. And it really comes down to, I think, for both of us, they're just really a lot more comfortable to wear around for protracted periods of time. They're lighter.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially mine, because mine has training plates in it. My JPC did. You know, dropping like, 10, 12 pounds, let's call it. It's not, you know, it's a fair amount of weight. And the thing about it is, though, is like, I did have that chest rig, but I wasn't, the knockoff one, I wasn't really convinced about ditching the JPC like for good until I finally got to that microfight rig that I have now. Because fundamentally, it's giving me exactly the same reloads, right? The exact same speed of reloads, the exact same retention that I was getting with my plate carrier, just without the plates. And so I'm getting the benefit of having this lightweight kit that I can really toss around, no problem, right? I'm much faster on the field because I'm not being held back by those training plates in my plate carrier. And it's just as stable for reloading compared to really that old knockoff one was not that good for that. The retention was crappy. The mags were sort of bounced around once you took one out and all this kind of stuff. I have no problems like that with my microfight. And so that's really, when I started using that, that's when I was like, okay, yeah, you know what? I'm not going back. Like, this is done.
That sort of comes back to one of the pieces of sort of our kit narrative, if you will, that Chris has mentioned as well, where we've definitely gotten to the point where there are some things that if you can afford them, we definitely think you shouldn't cheap out on. And, you know, that's not to say that, you know, you should absolutely go spend $400 on a chest rig right now and it will fix your airsoft game, because that's absolutely not the case. There's no way that's going to happen, really. But, you know, if you're getting annoyed by your knockoff brand mag pouches, your tacos or whatever, not actually retaining your mags, the best solution probably is to buy real ones. And yes, it's going to run you more, but they're pretty indestructible, because Phil and Chris and I have all tried. And, you know, if the three of us can't break it, you're doing okay. You know, likewise, we like those Blue Force 10 speed mag pouches, and we've run those into the ground as well. Like if they were going to fail, they probably would have between you, Chris, and I.
And that means that the good part about it is that you can get them secondhand, right? You can get them from someone who is offloading them and moving on to something else. So that means you don't have to go spend $80 on mag pouches when you might be able to find some that people are offloading for $40. Right now, you might say, well, if $40 is still expensive for mag pouches. Yeah, I mean, it's not cheap, but if you're looking for a resolution to your problem, which is that your mag retention sucks, that's going to be your best bet.
And hey, like, you're right. It's not cheap, but it's half the price of them new. So, there are benefits there. One of the things I'm finding interesting with the HPS setup also, just to get back to that for a second, is I tried the battle belt because I wanted something stable to mount the air tank on. Turns out putting all my other stuff on the battle belt makes it really stable. So that's staying. Mm-hmm. Like, that is non-trivially a more comfortable piece of kit than I would have expected. Like, I've seen them for years. I've known a bunch of people who've run them. Some of our guys still run them. And I was like, I'm not sure if how much I want this. It's kind of big. And I tried it, and I'm like, all right, I'm an ogre. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not big enough to get in my way, really. And it gives me a really stable platform for my sidearm. I think I'm actually going to put a third mag on it before I run it again. I'm taking the tank off and running in the Maxpedition for the foreseeable future. But yeah, so it's given me another place to run a mag. I'm probably going to pick up another of those PMags, polymer PMags that we've been using, because those turned out to be also an outstanding piece of kit, I've got to say. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't call them, quote unquote, a game changer, but they feed in everything that we have. They're very solid. They feed reliably really well. They're a good purchase.
Yeah. One of the other things that has changed, I think, in the last year, and I mean, it's sort of bit of a no-brainer, but it's the fact that we're doing this podcast has changed a bunch of stuff for us. One of which is that we've had the opportunity to have conversations about airsoft that normally we would not have had. So really to think critically about some of the things and aspects of our play that really we had never considered before. What would we do? What would we rather? We played those kinds of games. And that was a really good way to explore this hobby and to consider different perspectives, to think about and talk about ways that we could be doing things differently, to look back on things that we had done in the past, in some cases, even come to the realization that we moved beyond something that really we missed. And I think, for example, Pat's PX4 is a great example of that, right? Pat ditched his PX4, his Tokyo Marui GBB PX4 many years ago, and it's through conversations that we had that he decided to go and just buy another one because he remembered how great it was, right?
And I have zero regrets about buying that new one. It is super fun to shoot. It's super clean and crisp. Kosh, who is apparently just a little spend money demon sitting on my shoulder at this point, was talking to me about like metal parts kits for TM guns the last time we played, and I'm thinking about it. I really like that little gun, and running it on propane is a little bit hard on it. So maybe I'll tinker with that over the winter and make it a little more shiny just for the fun of it.
And it's, to come back to my original point on all of this is that having these conversations, I mean, there have been some times when we've recorded many podcasts sort of in a row. But most of the time we're recording one a week. So that means that weekly we are having a conversation, Pat and I. Now you're getting it a bit delayed, fair enough, but like Pat and I are still having conversation, or it could be with Chris or John or whoever. Every week we're talking about airsoft, we're thinking about airsoft, we're having conversations about the things that are important to us in airsoft. And that allows us to really progress as well, right? Because it keeps it front of mind for us. It keeps us engaged with the topic, and it means that we continue to enjoy it even when we're not necessarily playing. And especially during COVID, when we weren't able to play, it was a really good opportunity for us to reconnect and plug back into this hobby in ways that at the time, we just were not able to do. Right.
And I mean, I actually listen to this podcast when you put it out every week because Phil's doing all the hard work. I just talk, which I do for a living.
Right.
But yeah, I listen to this podcast every week because, there's a different sort of thought process to me to sitting down and talking it out with you and sitting down and listening to it and thinking about what we were saying. And, like one of the funny things here is, I've been a really not ineffective player, but a very passive player in terms of my role in our team and in terms of like my approach to play on the field for easily the last 4 years. Not in the sense of like not being willing to pull my weight as a member of the team, but in the sense of like being like, I'm just going to hang back and provide like, longer range fire support and cover you guys while you do the door kicking. And every time we've talked about this stuff, and just every time I put in time thinking about it in between these conversations and in between games, I've realized, no, there's really not a whole lot of reason for me not to be pushing up and being aggressive. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely not as good at it as you or Cal or Chris, but that doesn't mean I'm bad at it. And also I'm not going to get better by hanging back and taking long range shots. And the fact that I can take long range shots is great. But I'm really trying to up my game in terms of, like pushing forward with you guys and doing more work in that space. And that's been fun for me from a play point of view, and challenging and interesting from a play point of view. But, I'm glad to be doing it. And I think it is slowly giving me more tools and shaping the way I play in ways that I feel positive about. And that's really legitimately just a result of doing this podcast, right? The answer to the question, how do we get Pat to like push up more and be more aggressive? Apparently we get him to talk about what he's doing and why for, a couple of months. And then he goes, I think I'm going to change some of what I'm doing because I don't like the why.
And I mean, to be honest, I think that's a totally fair realization. We spend a lot of time, especially in our hobbies, not necessarily understanding or appreciating really what we're doing and sort of why we're doing it the way that we are. And so sometimes we do stuff in a way that's ineffective, or we do stuff in a way that we don't really enjoy, but you're just going through the motions. And it's not until you really stop to think about, okay, but hang on, why am I doing it this way? What am I getting out of this? That you come to the realization, maybe there's a different way I could approach this. Right. And in your case, I think that's very visible. I mean, last time we played together, I even made the comment to you. I'm like, wow, you're being really aggressive. And I knew just from knowing you, I knew that was because you were in a good mood. You probably got enough sleep that night, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, that does help for sure.
But it does help. But you're in a good mood, so you're feeling good, which means that you're going to do the things that you really want to be trying, which is getting out there, putting yourself out there, sort of kicking the door in, et cetera. And sometimes that motivation comes externally. Like I think when I play, for example, with John is the kind of guy who will just shout at me to do something and it will force me to do that thing, not because he's shouting at me and I'm scared of him, but because it sort of jars me into action, right? I get this sort of quote unquote command and it's like, oh yeah, I gotta go. Right? And sometimes that motivation, that sort of why will come internally. And I know in your case, we could give you that external push, but for it to come internally is for you is going to be a game changer, I think.
100%. I mean, if nothing else, like independent of the fact that I can be grumpy first thing in the morning, I'm a stubborn bastard. And I had tons and tons of, like practical reasons to be hanging back and providing sort of, air quotes support by fire, especially before last season, when I changed the gun to sort of dial it down a little bit to accommodate the new rules for FPS at the place we're playing. But that change it lost me a little bit of effective range, but not a ton, as you know from using the rifle. Mm-hmm. But there's no point in addressing that sort of like second line playstyle. And I think part of it, that developed a bit when we had reliably 8 or 9 guys on the field. And that meant that the front line was pretty thick and pretty heavy in terms of just like, our ability to put weight on any given part of the field where we needed to deal with a problem or push through people was very strong. And we're down to, 5 or 6, I think, a lot of the time, Storm Riders. And I, practically speaking, not that I'd realized this before I started trying to push up more, but I think it's very valuable for the team's ability to take objectives and, lay the smackdown, as it were. Mm-hmm. But I haven't done the sort of like move up, move and gun rifleman sort of playstyle in quite a while. And I definitely did enjoy it. And I'm definitely enjoying getting back to it. And, it also makes the game a little more sort of physicality and exercise intensive for me, more cardio while playing airsoft, which is honestly desirable because, I spend too much time sitting in a chair, so like that aspect of things is positive, but mostly just that game and several others that I've played over the last 8 or 9 months have just been like, man, no, like I want to be pushing up. I want to be, applying myself to the enemy in a more direct and immediate fashion than I have been. And the 249 actually, most of that honestly is just, it's a desire for tech work, and I think it looks badass, and it's very much a fashion soft piece for me.
Definitely.
But it's also I want this to work, and I want to see how it can work, kind of thing. And I definitely feel at this point that there are enough choke points on the field where we play reliably that if I can get that gun working the way I should be able to get it working, and I'm making good progress there, at least in my view, then it's going to be a very different playstyle from the rifleman playstyle. And it may go back to being, in some ways, a slightly more sedentary playstyle, but I guess that's sort of offset by the weight of the gun, maybe, when I am moving. I don't know.
It's true. I mean, it is a heavy piece compared to your rifle, especially now compared to your rifle with the HPA kit in it. I mean, it's a pretty lightweight piece of kit. So you really have like the both ends of the spectrum, really, right?
Yeah. And, I'll be straight with you. Like, the HPA continues to impress me, and every time the HPA continues to impress me, I get closer and closer to buying a HPA kit and putting it into the LMG. Phil is grimacing at me, but like it allows for a bunch of neat things in terms of making those work. I'm not looking at it and going, oh man, I'm going to make this, give this a crazy rate of fire or anything like that. But once they're working right, a HPA LMG is a little more reliable than an electric one in terms of part burnout. Mm-hmm. So there's an appeal there. I'm not dropping the money tomorrow, but I can save some money up for that if I decide I want to do it, and it not be a completely stupid idea.
I just got to fix my rifle before that happens.
I mean, that is, priority 1 or 2, depending on how long it takes for the parts to get here.
Yeah.
I have John's FAL apart. That's only a couple hours of work from being together in a gun.
No rush on that, though. He's in love with that AK-47.
Yes. The problem there is that he also probably wants me to do things to the AK-47, and I need to put the file back together first.
I suspect so.
The fun thing about John's AK-47 is, it's fun to shoot. It's a cool gun. I'm terribly afraid that like he and Steph and Carew are going to be like, hey Pat, you should get an AK-47 in some sort of weird Russian camo and join us for more cosplay. But hopefully they won't listen to that sentence, or you'll delete it or something, and I won't get caught in that trap.
I'm not going to delete it. I will say though, you do have your World War II kit to finish before you jump into any other impressions, and yep. I'm sure both of those guys will. They should respect it, but they likely won't. But they should.
I think my highest priority for airsoft purchasing right now is I've been wearing really cheap, shitty pants, just U.S. Woodland, but like the $40 garbage kind. Yeah, and they're really uncomfortable. And I finally just had absolutely lost my patience with it. I'm going to order a new pair literally when we finish recording this podcast episode. But after that, the rough out boots that I want for the World War II kit are actually back in stock as of 10 o'clock this morning.
Grand.
That was a nice email to get. So that's exciting. Especially getting that kit sort of, where a lot of it is wool, getting that up and running for like the October, November portion of the airsoft season, where it's much colder here, would be really pretty ideal, I think. Yeah. I've come to some interesting conclusions about the World War II kit too over the last year, because I haven't obviously gamed the whole kit, but I've messed around with a bunch of pieces of it and chatted with John about a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things I actually realized earlier this season when my rifle stopped working sort of inexplicably, and I was very salty about it, as we talked about in a previous episode, is I don't actually think I am going to upgrade the Garand. It shoots quite well as it is. And I think I'm just going to run it and enjoy it as it is, as a pretty stock airsoft gun that does pretty well.
No HPA for the Garand?
Oh my God.
John would probably eat you.
Oh my God. I think either that or he'd just like die. Die and come back from the dead and then eat me. The whole point of that kit is for it to look really good and historically accurate. The HPA kit is, to use an appropriate metaphor, a bridge too far for me for that one, for sure. Yeah. But I'm digging it a whole lot. And I think I'm just going to leave the Garand as is. And if it breaks, I'll probably put money into it and tune it. Because I'm going in there anyway, but it's very complicated to take apart. It's very complicated to work on, and it works quite nicely for a stock gun right now. And I don't think the airsoft kit is going to be my my high performance race car kit, as it were. Right? Like I think
for sure
that the IAR is definitely my workhorse gun, and that if I'm playing to kick ass, as it were, like if that's my primary goal, I'm going to show up in my modern kit, just like John is. And the World War II, it's a different beast. So Stefan has actually found a metal and wood kit to go on the Thompson I have. And the Thompson's a bit ahistorical for the grunt role that I'm sort of going for, but it's a really cool gun. So if I'm going to sink money after the boots, maybe I'll do that because it'll be a fun project for the winter as well.
Fair enough.
And it's making it fancy, right? Like, because really, the living history thing is one definite aspect of this, but the other primary thing for the World War II kit is it's definitely a fashion soft thing. It's cosplay, right?
Yeah. Make it fancy.
Exactly, right? And the Garand is already wood and metal and beautiful, so I don't need to do that there. And I was a little disappointed when I found out that the general infantry guys didn't actually carry a sidearm, because an excuse to buy a World War II era, 1911 A1 would have been really nice because they're definitely cool. But, that's fine. I don't actually need excuses to burn more money on the World War II kit.
No, that's right.
I've already done a fair amount of damage to the wallet with it, and I'm going to do a fair bit more with those boots. But it's there's cosplay, fashion soft stuff, and the historian stuff, and I know it's not going to be as efficient as picking up my M27 style AR and just destroying people with it.
Yeah, I think the last big thing that I want to talk about, as one of the big changes for us in the last year, has been the Discord. We've talked a lot we've plugged the Discord basically every single video since we created it, every single podcast since we created it. It was Cal's idea to throw a Discord server together because, quite honestly, he knows a lot more about how those work than myself or Pat or basically anybody else on the team, I'm pretty sure.
Definitely.
And so he came and said, hey, why don't we try it? And what do you think? I'm like, as long as you're running it, it would be fine. And I really didn't know. I was sort of like take it or leave it. Like I wasn't opposed to the idea, but I figured, well, I didn't expect that many people would be interested. And I was pleasantly surprised that people actually started joining the Discord, started engaging in conversation. And before I really knew it, we had created this very lively, very international community of airsofters where we very consistently have good, meaningful, positive discussions about airsoft and airsoft related topics, as well as a couple of memes getting shared here or there. But really, we've started just this awesome community of people who are interested in airsoft and sometimes in very, very different ways. Like we have people on the Discord who are interested more on the LARP side of airsoft. We've got people who are more interested on the performance side, wanting to sort of improve, day over day. There are people in between. There are people who play exclusively milsim. We got guys in there playing exclusively speedsoft, which how they found our Discord is sort of beyond me, but that's beside the point. We're happy to have everybody, every perspective. And it's just been outstanding. When I looked at our YouTube analytics, for example, and I looked at the demographics of the age groups of people who mostly listen to our content, the countries that they're from, the vast majority of people are in the ages of like 18 to 35, mostly in the United States and the United Kingdom, even more so than Canada. And yet, on our Discord, we have people from, the United States and Canada and the United Kingdom, but we have people in there from France, from Portugal. We have people in there from Mexico. We have people there from Finland. And I'm skipping some as well. It's awesome to see that community and the conversations that we're having in there. And it's made a really positive impact on my perception of airsoft sort of globally.
Me too. I've gotten to sort of, get to know some of the guys mostly through talking about tech work and people posting, memes about stuff that I'm into.
Yeah.
Or, we have a little section for people who play Warhammer and, we toss up the odd picture of, stuff we're working on, which is awesome, right? I like the whole cross-pollination of my hobbyist thing. It's great. But, man, honestly, shout out to the Discord because I'm having a humongous amount of fun with the HBA stuff. And I think that Steph would not have had any luck or anywhere near as much luck anyway, convincing me to try it had it not been for the body of expertise about that we had available just to go, hey, I bought this thing and I put it in and it's doing dumb things. Please help. Because I'm pretty good at airsoft teching, but I don't know anything. Well, I know a little bit now, but I didn't know anything at all about HPA. And man, I had a lot of dumb questions to ask. And everyone was super kind and they were super informative and it was awesome.
And I know Steph got help for his HPA when he was getting started from Todd and Chaz, who jumped on a video call on Discord to just troubleshoot some stuff. I know one of our guys, Locks in Portugal, he was having trouble with his AEP and he hopped on a video call and myself and Shane were looking at that with him, giving him a hand. And then we had a great conversation on video about, where he plays and, showing the field, and we did the same thing. And those are really valuable conversations to have. And that's when you recognize that our hobby is not just sort of the small community that we play in, although those are the people we play with the majority of the time. There are lots of other people all around the world who engage in the sport in very different ways. And it's really interesting to expand your worldview and get to talk to those people and see how airsoft is played, because they have a lot of really great ideas. They've got a lot of really great stories, pictures, videos to share about how and games that they've played, and whether it's like a cool milsim with an awesome converted Toyota Tacoma that that Chaz was showing us the other day, to that rundown building we were looking at in Portugal, and everything in between. It's awesome. People have been so supportive, providing us pictures for future videos, which we haven't recorded yet, but that's coming down the pipeline. Submitted videos for us to do video review on. It's a really good place to connect and just have meaningful conversations. And at the end of the day, if you need help, there is guaranteed someone in there who can provide the exact help you're looking for.
And it's so much better than, being on Reddit and looking at posts about people's airsoft stuff and watching YouTube videos. Don't get me wrong, I still do both of those things too.
Yeah.
But just getting to chat with people and getting to know them, and, I have a feel for, how Chaz and Glick and several of these other guys play, right?
Yeah.
And I've never played with them. They're quite far away from me. I might never get the opportunity to play with them, although it'd be rad to do so. Mm-hmm. But I have an idea of what airsoft is about for a whole bunch of other people. And, that's awesome. It's really cool to get to talk to people and share the joy of the hobby, and do so across, a lot of cultural boundaries, some linguistic boundaries, and a whole lot of countries' borders.
Yeah. And I will add, we are from Newfoundland, Canada. I mean, I recently joked about that in one of our latest videos, but we are from Newfoundland, Canada. It's an island with a very small population in northeastern Canada, right in the middle of the Atlantic. There's 250,000 people more or less in our urban area, which is a very small city by a lot of different standards. And many people have this notion that in order to do anything good, or to partake in certain hobbies, you really have to leave Newfoundland, get on the mainland, and get to these bigger areas in order to be successful. And that airsoft can't be fun in Newfoundland because you don't play with enough people. We only had 18 people at our last open game. How can that be fun? And by connecting with people all around the world, you realize that the videos that you see of people running around with 300 or 400 people games, that's not the norm. You have lots of people who are playing airsoft in small pockets all around the world, in smaller communities with smaller groups of people, with teams of 3 or 4 people instead of teams of 20. And all of that is okay. You can do that. You can be successful. You can have a great airsoft community without necessarily being in a group of people where you're getting 100 plus people every single skirmish.
And, you'll look at your YouTube videos and you have these huge games and, people showing up with helicopters and LAVs and stuff, and don't get me wrong, I want to go, I want to try, I want to do, but that, doesn't mean that what I'm doing with the Storm Riders at our local field with whoever shows up on any given weekend isn't fun.
That's right. Yeah. And it just goes to show you as well that whatever you're doing right now, keep at it. right? Because you might think, well, I can't do that because or whatever. And in point of fact, I was talking to Glick today, and he was saying, like, I wish people in our area did training like you guys did last weekend. And I was like, cool. So why don't you just do that?
Yeah, it's $20 worth of lumber, free cardboard, and a couple of guys. No problem.
Yeah. And I was saying, it's like we used to do weekly team practices for an hour. Start there. Do the meaningful drills for an hour together. And then once you've done that a whole lot and you get accustomed to the drills and the cadence and stuff, then you can stitch a couple of those together. And now you have a 3-hour session, and maybe you do an open session with your own people, right? So there's no reason why just because you see something that's being done. I mean, yeah, it's going to be harder in a small community to go and afford to rent a helicopter or a lav or whatever.
For sure.
But there's no reason that you can't attempt to do a lot of these things. And even if you don't see immediate success, that you can't stick with it. And I think by talking to people on the Discord, I've more than ever gotten reaffirmation that what we're doing with our channel, what we are doing with the content that we create is meaningful to people. It's helpful to people. And whether it's only a couple hundred views on a video, or whether it's 10,000 views on a video, it doesn't matter. You guys who are listening, you're getting something out of it, and that's meaningful to me. So I really can't thank you all enough for taking part in the Discord and engaging in our community, in helping make airsoft more fun for me, making airsoft more fun for Pat and everybody else on the team, by just being awesome, wholesome people who are willing to share and engage and be respectful and want to learn about airsoft all around the world, not just in your little pocket. So thank you again for that. It's just been a tremendous past 12 months, that's for sure.
It's been really, honestly, enriching. And, on a personal note, it's been cool for me. I've been reluctant to get involved very much with our YouTube stuff. If I'm being honest, because, I'm a bigger dude and people make fun of me. But this has done a lot to make me more comfortable with, being involved in both parts of it. It's helped me see sort of that, like, I can bring some value other than, my expertise at poking at airsoft guns to this and to our YouTube channel. So yeah, it's been really a pleasure. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to us ramble every week. And I genuinely hope you're having as much fun as I am.
Totally. So guys, that's it. That's 52 episodes wrapped. I, like Pat said, we hope you're having a great time with it. And we're not stopping. So this is going to be marked the end of season 1. We're starting season 2 just next week. There's no break. We're going right into episode 53 in season 2. So thank you so much for listening this week. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being on the Discord. And we will talk to you next week.
You guys are awesome. Talk to you soon.